everybody. Raul here for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the great honor and pleasure of chatting with songwriter, producer, vocalist, guitar player, and bassist for the Licorice Quartet, Tim Smith.
Hi, everybody.
So, Tim, starting from the beginning so we get to know you a little bit, how did you get started in music and on bass?
Well, when I was in high school, I grew up in Louisiana in Baton Rouge and went to a performing arts school. It was sort of like the movie Fame, if you remember that movie Fame, where it was all, we didn't have a football team and you had to audition to get in. I was a guitar player, and a buddy of mine I was in a rock band with had gone to the school. He was a year older than me. And the gentleman that was the jazz teacher had played trumpet in Woody Herman's band back in the day. And so he was an old school jazz guy. And when I auditioned and got in my last 2 years of school, playing jazz guitar, and I learned so much about not just even guitar or jazz, but just being a musician. He was the kind of guy you'd come in the morning for your first class at 8 in the morning, and he's got some bebop just blaring on the stereo and a bottle of scotch on his table in a thermos. And he was from Louisiana, so he had that kind of old school talk like this, you know, sit down and play some music kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he was great. So I learned a lot about just playing in a rhythm section and comping and all that kind of stuff. So did that, had a scholarship to go to Loyola and study with Alice Marcellus and all those folks, but I ended up moving to Atlanta to join a rock band instead. Mm-hmm. So I didn't do my college stuff in New Orleans like I probably, a bunch of my mates did that. And not many of them are really still playing music. So I kind of took a left turn and just started playing in bands that were out touring and stuff, a band called The Producers that was sort of a power pop band in the early 80s that had been established. So I did that for a couple of years, and then kind of was writing and doing my own thing here in Atlanta where that band was based. And then I got in touch with, or was asked to go audition for the band Jellyfish. So did that in 1991, 92, played with them, and then after that befriended some people in Atlanta and got some other work, started playing with Sheryl Crow, played bass with her for a while. Then I played with the Finn brothers, who was Tim and Neil Finn from Crowded House, New Zealand folks. And then what did I do? Play with a bunch of other people, just a lot of people. Sarah McLachlan, played bass with her for a time. Then I played with Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds for about 5 years. Noel Gallagher from Oasis, played guitar in his band. And now I'm doing the Licorice Quartet.
Gotcha. Well, and having started on guitar, did you just pick up bass out of necessity, or how did that happen?
So the band I referred to, The Producers, I was a huge fan of theirs, and there was an opening, their bass player was leaving. So I just said, I want to do this. I love their music. So I just borrowed a friend's bass. Actually, the guy that was the bass player in our jazz band had a Yamaha bass, never owned a bass, and learned all their songs and just drove down to a show in Louisiana and asked if I could come and audition. And at that time, that kind of music, the bass parts were power pop kind of stuff. So it was almost like you're playing guitar leads, very McCartney-esque, very similar to guitar playing for me.
And it is one of the challenges that guitar players that get into bass have to kind of modify their way of thinking, because if you play like a guitar player too much, then it can get a little overly busy.
Oh, I knew that dance. It was crazy. I mean, so the guys in The Producers were much older than me. They were 15 years older than me, and they loved my youthful enthusiasm and everything. But there were some times where they pulled me aside and said, can you just tone it down a little bit? And it taught me a lot about that. So I get that. And also even learning to play with somebody like Sheryl Crow after Jellyfish was a different set of bass circumstances, more from an R&B perspective and less is more, and finding the different kind of pocket and some of the drummers I got to play with. So yeah, I mean, but I've always thought of myself as a bass player second. I was always a guitar player, but I totally know what you're talking about, and it's a fine line there.
And it's kind of interesting because you mentioned McCartney, and I think he's a great example of somebody who didn't initially start on bass, but bass was needed, and he brought a lyrical element that now so many people would say, well, this is so iconic. This is just, who would have thought of that kind of lick? And as a multi-instrumentalist, yeah, you would think of maybe doing that. Whereas so many other people were just, solid, let's just stay on the groove, And there's nothing wrong with any approach. I enjoy them all, but
Sure.
it does see how people are influenced. Now, you mentioned with the Licorice Quartet, you guys have been together how long now?
We started working together in 2017, writing songs. All of us do other things and have been in touring bands. Roger Manning plays with Beck and still works with Beck. Eric Dover had toured with Slash and Slash's Snake Pit and Alice Cooper. So we've all been sort of touring, working musicians that way. And we had worked in Jellyfish together, and we got back together to do this project in 2017.
Nice. And the obvious bit of mathematical confusion is, even though you're called a quartet, there's only three of you.
Right. Yeah, well, the name is partially, there's a 70s film called The Licorice Quartet. It's sort of a Italian pseudo-erotic film that Roger always liked. It's a type of movie. It's not a porno or anything, but it's that's where partially the title comes from. But yeah, we thought it was an interesting play on words.
And you guys have a recent release, Threesome Volume 1.
Yep.
Very interesting. I find listening to the tracks, some of the videos, it's a unique sound, but it's, in my mind, because again, I grew up during the 60s, 70s and all that, you've got a really nice grasp on some retro elements where I'll kind of pick up a piece and I'll go, oh, Queenish, oh, The Who, oh, Beatles. Yeah, I'm picking up on a whole lot, but with it being blended the way it is, it's not like any particular other group, so it ends up being unique. I guess so many people, like when they're tasting a new food, they'll go, oh yeah, that tastes like chicken. Well, this doesn't taste like anything that I've necessarily encountered before, so it's very interesting. And lyric-wise, it seems to kind of be a throwback because a lot of things are whimsical. So how have you guys come up with this sound?
Well, I mean, it's not sort of unlike a really good soloist, meaning you kind of, and the jazz instructor I was referring to earlier used to say, learn all your scales, learn all your chops and stuff, and then sort of forget them. So for us, our music is sort of an amalgamation of all the things that we loved growing up and the records that we liked and production styles, but we don't want them to necessarily come out sounding exactly like this or that. It's just a product of what's in our heads. So that I think the big reason why we got together and worked together is because we all have the same kind of record collection, so that we could, for example, have a conversation in the song Fadoodle, which is the first song on our EP, and say, oh, this reminds me of kind of a Roxy Music thing, but the Brian Eno Roxy Music as opposed to the later. And we could all go, yep, I know exactly what you mean, and put our heads on and do that. And it's just really fun when you have that kind of, I don't even know what to call it, chops or whatever about your thing. And it's funny, too, because people have reached out on this record and have referenced things I hadn't heard in forever, like, oh, it reminds me of Clout2 a little bit, or however. I can't remember how you say the name of the band. It's I've only ever read their name. So there's some progressive rock elements. We never really thought of it in that term. We're not trying to be any one particular direction of anything. It's all is welcome.
Even the term prog rock is so broad, because I've talked to bass players with groups that have a very classic rock, in my mind, sound. And when I think classic rock, I think of this sounds like something I would have heard back in the 60s or the 70s. But they say, well, no, we're prog rock. And I'm like, okay. And at the other end of prog rock, you've got some, wild 6-string bass, double neck guitar work and stuff. So there's really a huge spectrum there. Now, looking at some of the videos with Fadoodle, very interesting bending with your notes, and even at the end, people need to watch that till the end so they can see you kind of shaking out your hands after that.
There's a disclaimer to that. So the video that we did, I used an old Hagstrom bass that I had just because I thought it looked cool. I actually played a Yamaha fretless on the track, but it's so ugly because it was one of the first things I bought, and I had taken the finish off of it and just put it down to the wood by literally took paint stripper all over it, and it's just awful. It looks awful. So I didn't want to use that in the video, but yeah, fretless is fun for me. I did it back in the 80s. It seems like it's, I don't think I'd played that bass since 1989 or something until we started recording again. So it's fun.
Well, earlier this week, I had the opportunity to look at Billy Sheehan's modified original P bass. And so if you want ugly, a bass, he loves it to death and, would never let it go, but it has washers on the front of it. He's got like 2 or 3 of them. I'm kind of like, okay, So, but hey, you love them even no matter how they look, right?
Well, yeah. Mine started. I just can't stand a bass neck that has all that plastic crap on it, so I'm usually sanding them down.
Mm-hmm.
I started and I'm like, I can't stop, and just it got all over the whole thing. Some of it sunk in and got into the wood and it's nasty, but it plays great. It's fun.
Talking about another video, one of my, I think it's kind of fun, Bluebird's Blues, that it has the chords with it. So is the intent for people to play along, those guitar players, or?
Sure. I mean, the gentleman that has that company, Tunelings, is a friend of ours, and he does that for any music. And he was just a fan and said, can I do this to one of your songs? I'm like, sure. But we like doing that anyway. I think we have enough musician fans and followers that are going to want to know what those inversions are and stuff. So
sure. We
tried to make it as, some of it I capo between sections, so it's not quite, we had to find a different way to notate them, but I think it's pretty fun.
Yeah. It's a very unique view there. And talking about your sound specifically, I always like to talk about gear, because bass people are gear acquisition syndrome kind of folks. How are you getting your sound?
Most of my sound in the studio has been either through a combination of my DI, which I don't have in front of me, but I use one of those Noble DIs, tube DIs, and then I've been using this Cali 76, which Origin Effects does, and it's sort of an 1176 on a pedal board. And that direct has been pretty much the bomb for me. Live, I use Ampeg SVT VR, the big heavy duty. I've got 2 in my basement. I don't think I can ever pick them up again. They're just so heavy. Or the Kemper. I use my Kemper. So that's pretty much my signal stuff. And some chorus, of course, on fretless.
Gotcha.
Just the blue chorus pedal.
And then with basses, Yamaha?
Well, I use the Yamaha fretless. I have, and then some other songs on the record. I think on Bluebird's Blues, I played a Fender Jazz. And then I also have it's sort of like a Nash company, but they're called K-Line, a jazz bass. I found that both of those companies, Nash and K-Line, are doing such amazing work for a working musician to get a really good, like what the custom shop can do, but I'm not going to pay $8,000 for a bass. I'm just not going to do it and bring them on the road. I have a 65 jazz. Actually, I just sold it, a 65 jazz bass, but I wouldn't bring it on the road anymore because I was just worried about it and it was worth too much money. So I like companies that are doing things for working musicians like K-Line and Nash that are making really solid instruments. So I'm trying to think what other basses I might have. Oh, I did play Hagstrom on some of the stuff, and then even a little Mustang bass on occasion.
Do you have a particular preference in strings?
Not really. On my Hagstrom, though, I found some of the old black tape wound strings, and I've loved those. I've kind of gotten into a thing where I play with my thumb a lot like this. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to take off any of that attack and just, I don't know. I've always felt like that my first finger always had a little bit too much clickiness when I would play. And so I started using my thumb. I think I saw Sting doing that. I was like, oh, I can try that. If it doesn't get too fast, I can kind of do it. And I've even seen McCartney do that too. You just get a little bit more thickness to your thumb there, but you can still dig in.
Kind of that fleshiness of it.
Yeah. So I think I've been using Ghs strings. I've got a bunch of them down. I used to change, when I first started playing, I would change strings almost after every show. That was when strings, you wanted them to sound like piano strings and be super bright and brilliant. And I'd boil them when I didn't have a new set and put them back on. I'd get another show out of them. And now it's like I try and keep them on as long as possible. And unless they just start losing their intonation completely, I'm going to keep them on.
Another element that's always many times kind of overlooked in the sound chain, do you have a choice in instrument cables?
The only thing that I really like is instrument cable that has the little button on it so that when you unplug it, it doesn't make any sound.
Yes.
Because I would always often, when I was in Jellyfish and in Sheryl Crow, I would often change between guitar and bass. And so I didn't want to have to change. I just always had one cable. And then I would hit an A-B switch to go from my guitar rig or to my bass rig, or sometimes I play acoustic guitar, but I always just use the one cable. Mm-hmm. So I just had to take my guitar off and hold that thing, and then just whatever I was given, I'd put that in.
Well, and looking ahead, I know that as we're chatting in times of the pandemic, a lot of plans are on hold for everybody, whether it's touring in support of a new album or anything like that. What are you guys up to for the thoughts for the future?
We have a second EP that's going to be released probably in December. We're mastering it at the moment. We've been doing a lot. We were never going to be a touring band unless we were to get to we're just not going to get in a van and drive around playing bars. And this music is not really 12-bar blues or anything. So it's not, we'd have to spend some time to get it prepared to go play some shows. We may still do some shows if we can. But other than that, we've been doing a lot of we started doing what we call experiences on our website. So if people wanted to call us or collaborate, write with us, do sessions. In fact, I've got to do a vocal session for a gentleman today, play on their songs and stuff. We've been doing a lot of that to collaborate, which has been fun because there's enough musicians that like what we do. They're at a level that we can give them things that they want. And it's all copacetic. We're at a level where we can collaborate in a cool way. It's keeping us busy.
And that would be at thelicorishquartet.com?
It is. Yeah.
Now, on your own, you also have timsmiththemusical.com?
Yep, that's my own personal page.
Are you guys active on social media at all, or is it a good place for people to follow what you're up to?
Yep, we have a Facebook page, we have an Instagram page and Twitter, we have a YouTube channel. We've been trying to do some sort of, Roger, our keyboard player, has quite a vintage keyboard collection, so we've been doing a series of videos where he shows you how, what he's used and what he's got. I'm going to probably do one for my fretless bass and show some things because people have been asking about that. But yeah, we try and, without pulling the curtain away too far, we like to share kind of what we're doing. Folks that have followed or follow Rick Beato's channel. Rick's a friend of mine in Atlanta. I've been on his show to recreate a Beatles thing. I'll go sing part of a song and he'll break down that, so we're trying to do things like that.
Well, very cool. Well, Tim, we appreciate you taking time from your schedule, and it's so great, thanks to the virtue of Skype, that we can chat, one-to-one, even though we're across the country. Folks, you've seen him here, Tim Smith, coming to you live on Bass Musician Magazine.
Thanks, everybody.